The blueprint for all life on Earth is its DNA. The discovery of the structure of DNA is considered to be one of humanity's most significant scientific achievements. Three of the scientists that discovered it won a Nobel Prize for their discovery. However, the person who really helped make this discovery happen was a woman who has been erased from history. Her name was Rosalind Franklin. Franklin was responsible for the X-ray photograph that allowed scientists to identify the structure of DNA. Unfortunately, two men took her work without asking her permission and won a Nobel Prize for it. Franklin was never given any recognition for her role in this historic discovery. She died at the age of 37, without knowing that her X-ray photograph of DNA would impact the field of biology in an unprecedented manner. This is the story of how the most significant scientific discovery to have ever been made was stolen from a woman. Rosalind Elsie Franklin, born in London in 1920 to a wealthy and politically influential Jewish family, displayed an extraordinary ability to engage with science from her earliest days. She pursued her undergraduate studies in the natural sciences at Cambridge University, where she was one of the few women studying natural sciences at that time in the United Kingdom. She graduated with her undergraduate degree during World War II in 1941. Following her studies at Cambridge University, Franklin worked on research related to coal that was useful to the British military during the war. She produced groundbreaking research related to the microstructure of coal that resulted in her earning a PhD in chemistry from Cambridge University. She relocated in 1947 to work as a scientist at the Laboratoire Central in Paris. There, she became proficient at X-ray crystallography, which uses X-ray photographs to analyze the arrangement of atoms and molecules. She soon established herself as one of the premier X-ray crystallographers in the world, and in 1951 was appointed to King's College London, where her research would focus on the structure of DNA. At King's College, Franklin was assigned the same project as the other researcher who would be using X-ray techniques to examine DNA, but there was a miscommunication from the very start. Maurice Wilkins, the other researcher, mistakenly believed that she was his assistant, rather than the equal independent researcher she was. Within the male-dominated industry of scientific research in the 1950s, this was often the case for women's expertise. Despite the miscommunication, Franklin began her work on the DNA project immediately, with great attention to detail. She spent many months preparing DNA samples in the lab and taking X-ray photographs of them with extreme accuracy. Franklin, together with her student Raymond Gosling, produced an X-ray photograph on May 6, 1952, that would change history. This photograph, known as Photo 51, was astounding. Photo 51 provided absolutely irrefutable proof that DNA has a helical structure containing two strands and a double helix. Furthermore, it gave the exact measurements and distance between the atoms of the double-stranded DNA. It was also the most complete X-ray photograph of DNA ever recorded. Franklin had carefully analyzed her evidence and had developed everything according to proper procedure. She intended to be completely certain before publication and was merely weeks away from her discovery of the structure of DNA. However, in January 1953, Wilkins did something that had far-reaching consequences for the future of science. He showed Photo 51 to Watson without the consent or knowledge of Franklin. At that time, Watson was a young American scientist who was working with Crick at Cambridge University to construct a model of DNA. However, they had reached an impasse as they did not possess the necessary data. The instant Watson saw Photo 51, he felt that something was amiss. Many years later, he wrote, "As soon as I spotted the picture, my mouth dropped open and I could feel my heart race." When building their model of the double helix, Watson and Crick relied heavily on Franklin's photograph. as well as her unpublished measurements. On April 25, 1953, their findings were published in Nature. Franklin also published her work in that same issue, utilizing her X-ray evidence. However, the ordering of the two papers suggested that Watson and Crick's discovery was supported by Franklin's findings, rather than vice versa. Franklin did not realize the full impact of her research while she was still alive. She left King's College and worked at Birkbeck College, where she made worldwide breakthroughs with viruses. In 1956, Franklin was found to have ovarian cancer, which many attribute to her exposure to X-ray radiation throughout her life. She was 36 years old at that time. Although she was ill with cancer, Franklin never stopped working. She had several surgeries and received experimental chemotherapy for her illness, but continued to conduct research right up until just before her death. Rosalind Franklin died on April 16, 1958, at age 37. She was not married and did not receive any major awards during her lifetime. She never recognized the significance of her research in relation to the discovery DNA. In 1962, 4 years after Franklin's death, James Watson, Francis Crick, and Maurice Wilkins received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for discovering the structure of DNA. Franklin's name was rarely mentioned in connection with those awards. In James Watson's memoir, The Double Helix, he describes Franklin as a frivolous individual, making fun of her looks and her behavior. And he characterizes her as one of the best scientists of the 20th century, as nothing more than a difficult woman who failed to grasp her own research. The truth of the matter took a long time to come out. Historians and scientists uncovered the story over decades. Franklin's photograph of DNA, known as Photograph 51, and the data associated with the said photograph were what enabled Watson and Crick to develop DNA as a concept and scientific study. Rosalind Franklin is a celebrated scientist today as one of the most influential scientists ever. Many places have been named after her, including buildings, universities, and even a Mars rover. Unfortunately, Rosalind Franklin passed away without knowing this recognition was going to occur. She passed away believing she was just an individual who worked in research. She also was not aware that if it wasn't for her photograph, Watson and Crick would have had nothing to use to develop their idea of DNA. If you would like to read more stories of unfortunate but extraordinary genius, please subscribe to our newsletter so you can continue receiving these amazing stories of brilliant minds that changed the world and did not receive anything in return for their work.